To prove triangles are congruent, you're going to make sure that all the corresponding sides and angles are congruent. So all three angles are congruent to the other triangle. All three sides are congruent to the other triangle. All right? Corresponding sides and angles are given to you either by showing what's equal or by giving you a congruent statement, okay? So in this picture, I know which angles are corresponding by looking at which ones are equal, okay? So if I look at angle A here, what's its corresponding angle? Which angle over there corresponds to A? Which one's equal to A? F. A and F are corresponding angles. And, oops, no wonder you can answer that. That keeps disappearing. I'm not sure what. And then B corresponds to E, right? Because they're equal. And C corresponds to D, okay? And side AB corresponds to what side? EF, right? Because they're equal. See, one tick mark. DF corresponds to what in A over here? AC. Does everybody see how I'm finding those corresponding sides and angles? Okay. Now, and please write this down because it's a really basic question, and yet every year I ask it it's the most missed question on the test. And I'm not sure why, because it's so simple. I think maybe it's because it's so simple you don't feel like you need to know it, but you do. This is a congruent statement. It just says that this polygon is congruent to this polygon. Okay, in this case a triangle. So triangle ABC is congruent to triangle FED. So a congruent statement is just a statement that the two polygons are congruent, although it does match up corresponding sides and angles. So remember we said A and F are corresponding, so they are both going to be in the same position in the list of letters. Okay, A is first and F is first. Then B and E, they're second, and C and D, they're third. So the corresponding angles are matched up, as well as the sides. Like we said, AB and EF are corresponding sides. So here's AB, and here's EF. They're both the first two. Okay, then BC goes with ED. BC is the second two, and ED is the second two over there. So all the angles, all the sides match up. So if I gave you like if I told you that triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle DEF, what angle in the triangle corresponds to angle X? B, right? What side corresponds to YZ? EF, right? Here's a tricky one. What side corresponds to XZ? DF, right? Does that make sense? They all correspond to each other. And they're listed that way in your congruent statement. So you can either take the congruent statement and draw the picture, or you can take the picture and write the congruent statement. All right, so take a second and mark all the sides and angles according to the list here. We can do this is to prove that, to prove the congruent statement, okay? And the way we're going to do it is to prove all three angles and all three sides are congruent. All right, so the way I do it, and the way I suggest you do it, is list all the corresponding sides and angles. So somebody give me all the corresponding angles. Can you tell me which angles are corresponding? You can use the congruent statement if you want. Good. P and M. Q and N. And? Right. Only because we can't tell which one is R, I got to say P, R, Q, and M, R, N. Does that make sense? Why I had to use 3 letters for those? Because R, you don't know which one of those 2 angles is R, so you have to list them. All right, now give me the corresponding sides. Howard, what are the corresponding sides?
Side QR.
Okay. And?
Side
Good. Okay.
Side
PR and? Good. And? Last but not least? Good. Okay. Now, to prove the two triangles are congruent, we got to prove all 6 of these. Yes. Well, as long as R is in the middle, it doesn't really matter which way we name it. Yeah, QRP and PRQ are the same. Like not in a triangle. You're right. Triangles would have to be. Okay. Oh. Okay. All right. So let's go through and try to prove all these things. As soon as I prove it, I'm going to mark it out so I know I'm done when I have all 6. So the first thing says angle P and angle M are right angles. Okay? How does that help? What can I say from that? If I know that P and M are right angles, then what do I know? Yep, they equal 90, and because they both equal 90, they're congruent. So I can say P is congruent to M by the right angle theorem. Your homework is on the board. It's not proving angles are congruent yet. It's just working more equations. So, okay, so we can say P is congruent to M, and that marks that one off. That's 1. The next one is R is the midpoint of PM. Okay, so here's R, there's PM, so that means I can say that PR is congruent to RM by the definition of midpoint. Okay, the next one says, so I've got PR and RM, so I can cross that one off. The next one says PQ is congruent to MN. That's a freebie. That's a given because that is one of my answers. Okay? Then I have R is the midpoint of QN. So again, if R is the midpoint of QN, that means QR and RN are congruent by the definition of midpoint. So QR is congruent to RN by the definition of midpoint. That should be it. There we go. And that's given. Now, if you were going to do this like exactly perfectly, you'd put probably both these givens together. But don't worry about it if you want to do them separately, if it helps you keep it logical. All right, so I can cross out QR and RN. So that just leaves these 2 angles that are left. So I look up here and I say, which angles can I look at the picture and tell are congruent? So these 2 are vertical angles, so I can say they're congruent by the vertical angle theorem. So I can say angle PRN is congruent to angle MRN by vertical angle theorem. Okay, and so I can cross that one off, and that just leaves Q and N. And if I look at it, there's really nothing about Q and N that I can use. So I'm going to rely on one of my new theorems, and that is angle Q is congruent to angle N by the third angle theorem. Remember that says if 2 of the angles are congruent, then the third one's also congruent. So that gives me all 6. I've just proved all 3 sides and all 3 angles are congruent. So I'm allowed to say that triangle PQR is congruent to triangle MNR. And the reason is all corresponding sides and angles are congruent. Okay? And that is the long way. So you'll be pretty glad when we get to the short way.